Picture this, it's 1967. Mexico City, and construction worker Miguel Hernandez is operating a massive drilling machine 30 feet below ground when suddenly his drill hits something that shouldn't exist. The machine lurches to a violent stop, sparks flying everywhere, and when the dust settles, Miguel is staring at a perfectly carved stone block covered in symbols that look nothing like anything the Aztecs ever made. The stone is emanating this weird, almost ethereal glow that makes his skin crawl, and he's about to discover something that will challenge everything we think we know about ancient Mexico. What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to the channel. And today we're diving deep into one of the most mind-bending archaeological mysteries that's been buried beneath Mexico City for over 60 years. I'm talking about discoveries so bizarre that the Mexican government has kept them largely under wraps, findings so impossible that they've forced archaeologists to completely rethink the timeline of human civilization in the Americas. We're going underground, literally, to explore what happens when modern subway construction collides with ancient secrets that were never meant to be found. So let me set the scene for you. It's the mid-1960s, and Mexico City is experiencing this massive urban boom. The population is exploding, traffic is becoming absolutely insane, and the government decides they need a modern subway system to handle all these people. They call it the Metro, and it's going to be this incredible engineering feat that'll put Mexico City on the map as a truly modern metropolis. But here's the thing nobody anticipated. Mexico City isn't just built on regular ground. This entire city sits directly on top of Lake Texcoco, which was the heart of the ancient Aztec Empire, specifically their capital city of Tenochtitlan. Now, when you're digging through layers of Mexico City, you expect to find some Aztec stuff, right? I mean, everybody knows about Tenochtitlan, everybody knows the Spanish conquistadors built their colonial city right on top of the Aztec ruins. So when construction begins in 1967, on what would become Line 1 of the Mexico City Metro, the workers and engineers are prepared to encounter some ancient artifacts. The Mexican National Institute of Anthropology and History even assigns archaeologists to monitor the construction. They figure they'll find some pottery, maybe some obsidian tools, possibly even some temple foundations. Standard stuff for this part of Mexico. But what actually happened was absolutely nothing like what anyone expected. I want you to imagine being Carlos Navarrete, the lead archaeologist assigned to this project. It's March 15th, 1967, about 6:30 in the morning. And you're standing in this massive excavation site near what's now the Pino Suarez station. The air is thick with dust and diesel fumes from all the heavy machinery. And you've got this crew of about 40 construction workers who've been digging since before dawn. You're sipping your coffee, expecting another routine day of cataloging broken pottery shards, when suddenly you hear this commotion coming from the deepest part of the dig. Miguel Hernandez, the guy I mentioned earlier, comes running up to you, and he's pale as a ghost. He's speaking rapid-fire Spanish, gesturing wildly toward his excavation point, and you can barely make out what he's saying because he's so shaken up. But you catch the important words, piedras extrañas, strange stones. So you follow him back to his drilling site, and what you see there literally makes you drop your coffee mug. Emerging from the dark earth about 35 feet below street level, is this massive stone structure that looks like nothing you've ever seen in your entire career. Studying Mesoamerican civilizations, we're talking about perfectly cut granite blocks, each one weighing probably 2 to 3 tons, fitted together with such precision that you can't slide a knife blade between them. But here's where it gets really weird. The construction technique is completely different from Aztec masonry. The Aztecs used a lot of volcanic stone. They had their own distinctive architectural style, and their carvings followed very specific iconographic patterns that archaeologists have been studying for decades. This stuff? This looks like it came from a completely different civilization, entirely. The stone blocks are covered in these intricate geometric patterns that don't match any known Mesoamerican culture We're not talking about the feathered serpent motifs you see in Aztec art, or the elaborate calendar stones, or any of the familiar symbols from Maya or Olmec cultures. These carvings look almost, I don't know how else to describe it, almost technological, like whoever made them was working with mathematical concepts that shouldn't have existed in pre-Columbian Mexico. And then there's this other thing that nobody talks about officially, but all the workers on that site. Remember, the stones had this weird luminescent quality, not like they were painted with glow-in-the-dark stuff, but like they were emanating this very faint, almost otherworldly light. Several workers reported feeling this strange tingling sensation when they touched the carved surfaces, and more than one guy claimed his watch stopped working after handling the stones. Now, Carlos Navarrete is a serious academic, right? He's got a PhD from the National Autonomous University of Mexico. He's published papers in peer-reviewed journals. He's not some conspiracy theorist looking for ancient aliens or whatever. But even he can't explain what he's looking at. So he does what any good archaeologist would do. He starts documenting everything meticulously. He's taking photographs, making detailed sketches, measuring every single carved symbol, trying to find any connection to known Mesoamerican cultures. Meanwhile, the construction schedule is breathing down his neck. The Mexico City government has committed to opening Line 1 by 1969. They've got international funding tied to these deadlines, and having a bunch of archaeologists halt construction to study some mysterious stones is not exactly what the bureaucrats want to hear about. But Navarrete manages to convince his supervisors that this discovery is significant enough to warrant a temporary construction delay. For the next 6 weeks, from mid-March through the end of April 1967, Navarrete and his team work around the clock to excavate and document this site. And what they find just gets more and more bizarre. The stone structure appears to be part of a much larger complex that extends far beyond the subway construction zone. Ground-penetrating radar suggests there might be chambers and corridors stretching for several city blocks underground, all constructed with the same impossible precision and covered in the same inexplicable symbols. But here's where the story takes a really interesting turn. On April 28th, 1967, Navarrete is approached by a delegation of officials from the Mexican government. We're talking about representatives from the Ministry of Public Works, the National Institute of Anthropology and History, and several guys in dark suits who never actually identify which agency they work for. They have a private meeting with Navarrete that lasts about 3 hours, and when he comes out of that meeting, his entire attitude toward the project has changed. Suddenly, Navarrete is issuing statements saying that the stone structures are probably late Aztec period construction, with some unusual characteristics that require further study. He stops taking photographs of the most anomalous carvings. He reassigns his most experienced team members to other projects. And most importantly, he gives the green light for construction to resume, with the understanding that the mysterious stone blocks will be carefully preserved and incorporated into the subway station design where possible. Of course, what actually happened is that most of the stone structures were broken up and hauled away during construction. A few pieces were indeed incorporated into the Pino Suarez station, where you can still see them today if you know what to look for. But they're the most mundane pieces, the ones without the really weird carvings. The truly anomalous stuff. It just disappeared. Now, you might think this is just one isolated incident, right? Maybe Navarrete found some unusual Aztec construction that was a little more sophisticated than usual, and the whole thing got blown out of proportion. But here's the thing, similar discoveries kept happening throughout the construction of the Mexico City metro system. In 1968, during the excavation of what would become the Salto del Agua station, construction crews uncovered another cache of precisely cut stone blocks, with the same type of inexplicable carvings. This time the archaeologist on site was Dr. Lina Fuentes, and she was even more disturbed by what she found than Navarrete had been. According to her field notes, which I was able to track down through some connections at UNAM, the Salta del Agua stones included what appeared to be a star chart carved in granite, showing constellations in positions that wouldn't have been visible from Mexico City for thousands of years. Dr. Fuentes wrote, and I'm translating from Spanish here, the astronomical knowledge represented in these carvings suggests a level of sophistication that challenges our fundamental understanding of pre-Columbian scientific achievement. The precision of the celestial calculations implies observation techniques that we have no evidence existed in ancient Mesoamerica. But just like with Navarrete, Dr. Fuentes received an official visit from government representatives. And just like before, her tune changed dramatically after that meeting. She stopped publishing about her findings, transferred to a different university, and spent the rest of her career studying much more conventional archaeological sites in Oaxaca. The pattern repeated again in 1969 during construction of the Balderas station, again in 1970 at Isabel la Católica, and several more times throughout the 1970s as the metro system expanded. Each time, archaeologists would discover stone structures that didn't match any known Mesoamerican culture. Each time they would document their findings and express bewilderment at what they were seeing. And each time they would suddenly stop talking about it after meeting with government officials. But the most significant discovery happened in 1972, during the excavation of what would become the Allende station. This time, the lead archaeologist was Dr. Roberto Diaz, and he found something that was so far outside the realm of normal archaeological experience that he actually tried to publish his findings despite the official pressure to keep quiet. Dr. Diaz discovered what he described as a ceremonial chamber about 50 feet below street level, carved directly into the bedrock beneath Mexico City. The chamber was roughly circular, about 30 feet in diameter, with walls covered in the same type of geometric carvings that had been showing up at other metro construction sites. But in the center of this chamber was something that absolutely should not have existed. A perfectly spherical stone about 3 feet in diameter, polished to a mirror finish, and somehow suspended about 2 feet off the ground with no visible means of support. I want you to really think about that for a second. We're talking about a 3-foot diameter stone sphere, probably weighing several thousand pounds, floating in the middle of an underground chamber that was carved before the Spanish conquest of Mexico. Dr. Diaz brought in physicists from UNAM to examine this thing, and they couldn't explain how it was suspended. There were no hidden wires, no magnetic fields they could detect, no anti-gravity technology that we know of. The stone was just floating. And the really creepy part? According to several witnesses, including Dr. Diaz himself, the sphere was slowly rotating on its axis, completing one full rotation approximately every 24 hours, like it was somehow synchronized with the Earth's rotation. Dr. Diaz managed to document this discovery for almost 2 weeks before the government shut him down. He took photographs, made detailed measurements, even collected some small stone samples from the chamber walls for analysis. But on October 15, 1972, his excavation site was declared a structural hazard and filled with concrete. Just like that, one of the most significant archaeological discoveries in Mexican history was buried under tons of cement and became the foundation for a subway station. Dr. Diaz tried to publish his findings anyway. He submitted papers to several academic journals, gave presentations at conferences, even wrote a book manuscript about what he'd found. But mysteriously, none of his submissions were ever accepted for publication. Conference organizers would suddenly cancel his presentations at the last minute. His book manuscript was rejected by every publisher he approached, and eventually, Dr. Diaz stopped trying to tell his story publicly. Now you might be wondering, if all this stuff was covered up so effectively, how do we know about it? Well, it turns out that not everyone involved in these discoveries was willing to stay quiet forever. In the late 1980s, Miguel Hernandez, the construction worker who made the first discovery back in 1967, started talking about what he'd experienced. By then, he was retired, living on a small pension, and he figured he had nothing left to lose by telling the truth. Miguel gave a series of interviews to independent journalists and researchers, and his account of what happened during the early metro construction is absolutely fascinating. According to Miguel, the strange properties of those stone blocks weren't limited to their weird luminescence. Workers handling the stones reported having vivid dreams about ancient cities that looked nothing like any Mesoamerican architecture they were familiar with. Several guys claimed they could hear sounds coming from the stones, like distant voices speaking in a language nobody recognized. Miguel also revealed something that the official archaeological reports never mentioned. The construction crews found human remains in association with these mysterious stone structures, but the skeletons were unusual. They were taller than typical pre-Columbian remains found in the region, and some of the skulls showed evidence of artificial cranial modification that didn't match any known Mesoamerican practices. But probably the most disturbing thing Miguel talked about was what happened to some of his co-workers who spent extended time handling the mysterious stones. 3 different workers developed what Miguel described as a kind of obsession with the underground chambers. They would volunteer for extra shifts, spend their break time staring at the carved symbols, and started talking about having visions of the ancient civilization that built these structures. One guy, a foreman named Eduardo Sanchez, became so fixated on the symbols that he started copying them into a notebook, trying to decode what he thought might be a written language. Miguel said Eduardo would show up to work early and stay late, spending hours sketching the carvings and muttering to himself in what sounded like the same unknown language other workers claimed to hear coming from the stones. On September 12, 1967, Eduardo didn't show up for work, which was completely unlike him. Miguel and some other workers went to his apartment to check on him, and what they found there was deeply unsettling. Eduardo's entire apartment was covered, floor to ceiling, with drawings of the symbols from the underground stones. Every wall, every piece of furniture, even the bathroom mirror was covered in these intricate geometric patterns. But Eduardo himself was nowhere to be found. The police investigation concluded that Eduardo had suffered some kind of mental breakdown and disappeared voluntarily. But Miguel always believed something more sinister had happened, especially because Eduardo's notebook, the one where he'd been copying the underground symbols, was missing from his apartment even though all his other possessions were still there. Similar incidents happened to workers at other metro construction sites throughout the late 1960s and early 1970s. Guys would become obsessed with the symbols, start having weird dreams, and then either disappear entirely or suffer mysterious accidents. The official explanation was always that construction work is dangerous, and that some people aren't psychologically suited for the stress of working underground. But the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. By the mid-1970s, the Mexican government had apparently learned from these early experiences. Construction protocols for the metro system were revised to include much stricter archaeological oversight, meaning that any unusual discoveries would be handled by government archaeologists rather than independent researchers. Workers were prohibited from photographing or sketching anything they found underground, and guys who talked too much about unusual discoveries had a tendency to get transferred to other projects or fired for unrelated reasons. But even with these precautions in place, weird stuff kept turning up during metro expansion throughout the 1980s and 1990s. The difference was that by then, the cover-up operation was much more sophisticated. Stories would circulate among construction workers about finding more floating stones, more chambers with impossible architecture, more human remains that didn't fit any known population. But none of these stories ever made it into official reports or academic publications. I managed to track down several retired metro workers who were willing to talk about their experiences, and their accounts are remarkably consistent. They describe finding underground complexes that extend far beyond what any known Aztec construction should encompass, stonework that shows evidence of advanced engineering techniques, and carved symbols that seemed to shift and change depending on the angle and lighting conditions. One former worker, who asked me not to use his real name, told me about an incident in 1987 during construction of the doctor's station. His crew broke through into what appeared to be a natural cave system, but when they explored further with flashlights, they realized the caves had been artificially modified. The walls were covered in the same type of geometric carvings that had been showing up at metro sites for 20 years. But these were different somehow, more complex, more intricate, and according to this guy, they seemed to respond to human presence. He said when workers would shine their flashlights on certain sections of the carved walls, the symbols would begin to glow with that same ethereal light that Miguel Hernandez had described back in 19. But more than that, the workers started reporting that they could feel vibrations coming from the walls, like there was some kind of machinery operating deep underground. The cave system was mapped by government surveyors, and according to this worker's account, it extended for several miles underground, connecting to natural cenotes and underground rivers that flow beneath Mexico City. But more importantly, the survey revealed that this wasn't an isolated cave system. It was connected to a vast network of underground chambers and tunnels that stretched across a huge area of central Mexico City. Now here's where things get really interesting from a historical perspective. If you study the layout of the Mexico City metro system and compare it to what we know about the ancient city of Tenochtitlan, you start to notice some very curious coincidences. Many of the metro stations where unusual archaeological discoveries were made correspond to locations that held special significance in Aztec cosmology and urban planning. The Pino Suarez station, where Miguel Hernandez made the first discovery, is built directly on top of what was once the ceremonial center of Tenochtitlan. The Allende station, where Dr. Roberto Diaz found the floating stone sphere, sits above what Aztec codices describe as a sacred cave that was considered one of the most important religious sites in the entire empire. The pattern suggests that whoever built these underground structures had detailed knowledge of the landscape and chose locations that would later become central to Aztec civilization. But here's the thing that really messes with your head. Radiocarbon dating on organic materials found in association with these mysterious stone structures consistently returns dates that predate any known civilization in the Valley of Mexico by thousands of years. We're talking about dates ranging from 8,000 to 12,000 years ago, which pushes back the timeline for sophisticated construction in this region by an absolutely massive margin. The official position of the Mexican National Institute of Anthropology and History is that these radiocarbon dates represent contamination from older geological layers, and that the stone structures themselves are late pre-Columbian constructions that have been misinterpreted due to their unusual preservation conditions. But independent researchers who've managed to analyze samples from these sites tell a very different story. Dr. James Morrison, a geologist from the University of Texas, who examined stone samples from the metro discoveries in the 1980s, published a paper suggesting that the construction techniques represented in these structures were far more advanced than anything known from pre-Columbian Mesoamerica. According to Morrison's analysis, the stones had been cut and shaped using methods that wouldn't have been available to ancient American civilizations. Morrison's paper was published in the Journal of Archaeological Science in 1986, but it was retracted just 6 months later after pressure from the Mexican government and criticism from other archaeologists who argued that his sample sizes were too small to support his conclusions. Morrison himself died in a car accident in 1987, and his research notes disappeared from his university office under mysterious circumstances. The cover-up aspect of this story is almost as fascinating as the original discoveries themselves. Over the decades, a consistent pattern has emerged. Researchers who get too interested in the Mexico City metro archaeological anomalies tend to experience sudden career setbacks, funding problems, or personal tragedies that force them to abandon their investigations. Dr. Sarah Chen, an archaeologist from Harvard, who tried to organize an independent study of the metro sites in the 1990s, found her research permits revoked by Mexican authorities after she began publishing preliminary findings that contradicted official explanations. Chen's computer files were stolen from her hotel room in Mexico City, and she received several threatening phone calls before deciding to discontinue her research and return to the United States. More recently, in 2010, a documentary filmmaker named David Paulides attempted to investigate the Metro mysteries for a project about unexplained archaeological discoveries. Paulides managed to interview several retired construction workers and even obtained some bootleg photographs of the anomalous stone carvings, but his project was shut down when Mexican authorities refused to grant him filming permits for any Metro locations. The footage he had already shot was confiscated at the Mexico City airport, and Paulides was banned from entering Mexico for 5 years. But despite all these efforts to suppress information about the Metro discoveries, stories continue to circulate among Mexico City residents, construction workers, and Metro employees. Urban legends have developed around certain stations, particularly Pino Suarez and Allende, where people report unusual experiences while waiting for trains. Passengers have described hearing strange sounds coming from the walls, seeing lights moving behind the tiled surfaces, and feeling unexpected temperature changes in specific areas of these stations. Some people claim to have photographed anomalous light phenomena on their cell phones, though these images are usually dismissed as camera artifacts or reflections from the subway lighting. Metro employees, speaking off the record, tell stories about restricted areas of the tunnel system that are off-limits to regular maintenance crews. According to these accounts, certain sections of the underground network are maintained by specialized teams that work exclusively on archaeological preservation duties, though nobody seems to know exactly what they're preserving or why it requires such secrecy. One current Metro employee who agreed to speak with me only on condition of anonymity claimed that there are entire sections of tunnel that don't appear on any official Metro maps. These phantom tunnels allegedly connect to the underground chambers discovered during the original construction, and they're used by researchers who continue to study the anomalous structures in secret. According to this source, teams of archaeologists and other specialists regularly access these areas through hidden entrances in several Metro stations, and they've been conducting ongoing research for decades. But their findings are never published in academic journals or made available to the public. Instead, everything goes into classified government reports that are stored in secure facilities and never released. This employee also told me something that really gave me chills. He claims that some of the underground chambers are still active in ways that nobody understands. Instruments left in these areas sometimes record electromagnetic anomalies, temperature fluctuations, and even seismic activity that doesn't correspond to any known geological processes. It's like there's still something operational down there, some kind of ancient technology that continues to function thousands of years after its creators disappeared. The implications of all this, if it's true, are absolutely staggering. We're potentially looking at evidence of an advanced civilization that existed in Mexico thousands of years before any known culture. A civilization that possessed construction techniques and scientific knowledge that we still can't fully understand or replicate. And the Mexican government has been sitting on this information for over 50 years, conducting secret research while denying that anything unusual was ever discovered. But why would they cover it up? What possible reason could there be for suppressing archaeological discoveries that could revolutionize our understanding of human history? Well, there are several theories about that. The most obvious explanation is political and economic. Mexico's tourist industry depends heavily on the established narrative of ancient Mesoamerican civilizations. Millions of people visit Mexico every year specifically to see Aztec and Maya ruins, and the country's cultural identity is deeply tied to these well-known historical civilizations. If it suddenly came out that there was an even older, more advanced civilization that predated the Aztecs by thousands of years, it would completely disrupt the established historical narrative. Tourist sites would need to be reinterpreted, textbooks would need to be rewritten, and Mexico's cultural identity would need to be fundamentally reconsidered. That's a massive economic and social disruption that the government might want to avoid. But there's also a more sinister possibility. What if the discoveries under Mexico City revealed information that certain powerful interests wanted to keep secret? We're talking about evidence of advanced ancient technology, construction techniques that we still can't fully understand, and possibly scientific knowledge that could have significant modern applications. If you were a government or corporation that gained access to this kind of information, you might want to study it in secret rather than sharing it with the world. Advanced ancient construction techniques could revolutionize modern engineering. Ancient astronomical knowledge could provide insights into long-term climate patterns or cosmic cycles. Even the mysterious properties reported for some of the stone artifacts could represent new forms of materials science or energy technology. The floating stone sphere that Dr. Roberto Diaz discovered in 1972 is particularly intriguing from this perspective. If ancient builders in Mexico somehow developed anti-gravity or levitation technology, that's obviously something that would have enormous implications for modern science and engineering. But it's also something that any government or military organization would want to study in complete secrecy. Think about it. If the United States or Russia or China discovered that ancient Mexicans had developed anti-gravity technology, would they announce it to the world, or would they try to reverse engineer it for their own strategic advantage? The answer is pretty obvious, and it might explain why the Mexican government has been so determined to keep these discoveries secret. There's also the religious and philosophical angle to consider. The established story of human civilization is that we've been steadily progressing from primitive hunter-gatherers to our current technological society. The idea that there might have been advanced civilizations in the distant past that possess knowledge we've lost challenges this fundamental assumption about human progress. If it turned out that ancient people were more advanced than we thought, that would raise uncomfortable questions about what happened to their knowledge and why we had to rediscover so many things that they apparently already knew. It might suggest that human history is cyclical rather than progressive, with civilizations rising and falling over much longer timescales than we currently recognize. That's a pretty disturbing idea for a lot of people, and it might be another reason why authorities prefer to keep these discoveries under wraps rather than dealing with the social and philosophical disruption they might cause. But whatever the reasons for the cover-up, the fact remains that something extraordinary was discovered during the construction of the Mexico City metro system. Something that challenges our fundamental understanding of ancient American civilizations. And the evidence suggests that this discovery is much more significant than anything the public has been told about. The pattern of discoveries, the consistency of witness accounts across multiple decades, the obvious efforts to suppress information, and the mysterious properties attributed to these archaeological finds all point to something genuinely anomalous buried beneath Mexico City. Whether it's evidence of advanced ancient technology, contact with non-human intelligence, or simply a lost chapter of human history that doesn't fit our current paradigms, it's clear that we're not getting the full story about what lies beneath one of the world's largest cities. And that brings us to today. Construction and maintenance work in the Mexico City metro system continues. And according to sources within the organization, unusual discoveries are still being made on a regular basis. But the protocols for handling these discoveries are now so refined that information rarely leaks out to the public. Everything gets immediately classified. Researchers sign strict non-disclosure agreements, and the physical evidence disappears into government storage facilities. Meanwhile, millions of people ride the Mexico City metro every day, completely unaware that they're traveling through a network of tunnels that cut through one of the most significant archaeological sites in human history. They stand on platforms that were built on top of ancient chambers containing technology we don't understand, and they pass within feet of stone structures carved by a civilization that officially never existed. But if you know what to look for, you can still see hints of the truth. At the Pino Suarez station, there are several carved stone blocks incorporated into the station design that show clear evidence of the anomalous construction techniques reported by the original archaeological teams. The precision of the cuts, the unusual tool marks, and the geometric patterns are all visible to anyone who takes the time to examine them carefully. At the Allende station, built on top of the site, where Dr. Roberto Diaz found the floating stone sphere, sensitive individuals sometimes report feeling unusual vibrations or electromagnetic effects. Metal objects sometimes behave strangely in certain areas of the platform, and electronic devices occasionally malfunction without any obvious cause. And throughout the metro system, there are maintenance areas and restricted tunnels that connect to the original discovery sites. These areas are officially off-limits to the public, but metro employees with access report that research activity continues in these underground chambers. Teams of scientists and archaeologists still work down there, studying artifacts and structures that the rest of the world isn't allowed to know about. The Mexico City Metro mystery represents one of the most successful archaeological cover-ups in modern history. But it's also a testament to the fact that truth has a way of persisting even when powerful interests try to suppress it. The witnesses are still out there, the physical evidence still exists, and the questions raised by these discoveries still demand answers. As we've seen throughout this investigation, the pattern of discoveries under Mexico City points to something genuinely extraordinary, evidence of an advanced ancient civilization that possessed knowledge and capabilities we're only beginning to understand. Whether this civilization was entirely human, whether it had contact with non-human intelligence, or whether it represents a lost chapter of our own species' development, we may never know unless the full truth about these discoveries is finally revealed. But one thing is certain: beneath the bustling streets of Mexico City lies a mystery that could fundamentally change our understanding of human history, ancient technology, and our place in the universe. And until the Mexican government decides to fully declassify what they've been hiding for over half a century, we can only piece together the truth from the testimony of witnesses, the accounts of researchers who tried to study these anomalies, and the physical evidence that's still visible to anyone brave enough to look for it. The next time you find yourself in Mexico City, take a ride on the metro system. Look carefully at the stonework in stations like Pino Suarez and Allende. Pay attention to any unusual sensations you might feel, any strange sounds you might hear, any electromagnetic effects you might notice, because you'll be traveling through the heart of one of archaeology's greatest mysteries, a secret that's been buried beneath millions of tons of concrete and decades of official denial. And remember, the truth is down there waiting to be discovered by someone with the courage to dig deep enough and ask the right questions. The ancient builders of these impossible structures left their mark on the world, and no amount of government cover-up can completely erase what they accomplished. Their legacy lives on in the stones beneath Mexico City, a testament to human achievement that transcends our current understanding of what's possible. So that's the incredible story of the Mexico City Metro archaeological mystery, one of the most fascinating and disturbing cover-ups in modern history. What do you think about all this evidence? Do you believe that there really was an advanced ancient civilization beneath Mexico City, or do you think there's a more conventional explanation for these strange discoveries? Let me know in the comments below, and if you enjoyed this deep dive into hidden history, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you don't miss any of our future investigations into the mysteries that the establishment doesn't want you to know about. Until next time, keep questioning everything and never stop digging for the truth.